Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is episode 310 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. I'm James, joined by Ryan and Spencer this week to recap a really busy week of Brewers news. Coming fast and furious there. You know, we've got the manager stuff to talk about, Brandon Woodruff situation, plus a whole bunch of questions. But first, Spencer, how are you doing this weekend?
I'm doing pretty well. Actually got to see a Badger win yesterday. Bucks have been on a nice roll, so things are going a lot better than they were a week ago, I guess. It's
A rare Badger win, yeah.
a rare
that
Badger
was
win.
interesting. They made it too interesting at the end again. But hey, going bowling again. So can't wait to see them in like the Motor City Bowl or something like that.
Pinstripe Bowl.
Yes. Yeah, going back to Yankee Stadium. Ugh. Ryan, how have you been this week?
Good. Made some money on some degenerate activities yesterday. That was a lot of fun. My brother is in from Boston, so of course we headed over to the local casino and actually were quite successful. So it was a fun afternoon that way. Actually, afternoon into the evening. Then we came back and I watched my first Formula One race, though I was mostly asleep because it started at midnight. So they're apparently into that. So I don't know. I don't think that's going to be a thing. I don't think I could take my soccer fandom and like transform it into F1 like they have. And I'm not watching that Netflix series. So I like refuse. So
already too many things to watch at this point.
Exactly.
But if you like that, good for you.
Exactly.
Hope you enjoyed it. The spectacle of it. I can't get into it, but you know, I'm not into everything, and that's okay. All right. Like I mentioned, a lot to get to, so let's just dive right in because we have a ton of questions. And of course, you can send in a question over on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/MKE Tailgate. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and on Reporting as Eligible, the Packers podcast. $5 gets you that question perk, plus some additional exclusive content, including the Minor League Extra with Ryan and James Anderson of RotoWire, as well as Paul's Packer mini pods every week. Even if you're not a patron, support us another way. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening to this right now. Leave a 5-star review for us. And while you're there, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button. Make sure you never miss an episode there. Because, you know, news has been coming fast and furious over the last couple of weeks. So a couple weeks ago, we learned Craig Counsell crossing the state line over into Chicago, and that left an opening for the Brewers. And you know, after interview process that lasted a couple of weeks, they ultimately went with the in-house guy. Pat Murphy is named their new manager. Sort of feels like they also named a manager in waiting in some sort of terms in Rickie Weeks, giving him the title of associate manager. We'll talk about how rare that is. But we have a ton of Rickie questions. We'll get into that in a minute. Understandable, still a favorite of mine. But I guess first we have to address the guy who's actually in the manager's chair, at least nominally speaking. So you know, Pat Murphy, his first non-interim gig in the majors, age of 65, obviously a long-time coach, I should say, in the college ranks. But I guess, Spencer, when Pat Murphy is stepping into his first managerial role at the age of 65, what would constitute a success for him, do you think?
Yeah, first of all, I guess I will say that the decision is growing on me a little bit over the last week. I wasn't thrilled when it first came out.
Same.
Kurt Hogue did a good job of prepping me for it by writing an article and letting me know that they were pretty interested in it. So that may have helped my initial reaction. But I do think that he's probably, if they weren't ready to give Weeks the job, which I kind of think they weren't, and they do want to eventually give it to him, that this makes some sense to keep everybody in-house and do it this way. For him, success is continuing exactly what's been going on for the Brewers the last few years, in my opinion. It's continuing to play kind of that new era of baseball, not going into some old school habits that he may have had when he was a head coach in college or even in his short Padres stint. He needs to stay with what the Brewers have been doing. Now, that doesn't mean he has to be the exact same person Counsell was. He has to do it his own way, but success for him is just continuing to build on exactly what they've been doing. And I don't think there's too much more to it. I don't think I'm expecting any World Series with him or a guaranteed World Series or anything along those lines with him as the manager, but success is just to keep doing what's been happening already.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a transitional period for them as you start to have, it would look like, with Brandon Woodruff being DFA, or not DFA, non-tendered, which we'll get to later, and Corbin Burns, having really 1 year left at most. It might be one, it might be none, but at most he has 1 year left. And then Willy Adames, there's more of a possibility he could stick around, but still, he's in the last year of his contract as well. So there is going to be this transition period as they're bringing up all these good young players that they have in the farm system. This is going to be an inevitable time of transition. So I guess kind of just going through that time period successfully and getting those guys to be successful would be a big feather in his cap. Like if he can successfully bring in guys like Tyler Black and Jackson Churio and Jefferson Caro and Jacob Mizorowski, Robert Gosser, all those guys, if he could successfully get them in, and the freshman class from last year help them to become better, like if these guys can take steps forward and become the Brewers' next core, that would be a huge success, right? Like that would be, even if they don't win particularly a lot in the time period, like if say they miss the playoffs next year or maybe for a couple of years, something like that, even if they're not actually making the playoffs, if those guys are becoming successful, that would be a long-term success for his tenure. So there's that. And I think I had the same reaction you did. I did not want this. I had it, I think at one point, the tweet I put out was something like Mattingly worse than Murphy, and then everybody else above Murphy. So it was like, well, at least he's better than Mattingly, which I really, really, really did not want. And I'll stick by that. But so now that we have him, looking into kind of what he is, I think the thing that I missed out on before and didn't really consider was he does have a track record as a very successful college head coach of developing young players. Like he knows what it takes to develop young players into successful baseball players. So there is that background. And so it's been a while since he was really kind of in that role and doing that, but I think that he understands that process and what it takes. And some of his comments from his initial press conference echoed that, right? So I think that's the biggest plus here is he does have that sort of history. And he does seem to have the respect of the players. He does seem to be, really, really loved that way. He's kind of quirky. It sounds like it's a what did they say about his sense of humor? His sense of humor is very dry, extremely dry. Like yeah.
I can see how him and Rowdy got along. Yeah, some of those quotes that came out, but focusing on tough love and all that. So
right.
I'm with you guys. I was kind of underwhelmed. I think I told you guys privately and maybe publicly on Twitter. I can't remember. I tweet too much, but Pat Murphy to me was maybe a sign that either they were fine with the status quo or that they were planning on taking, like a half step back for a year or two, just to kind of develop the younger guys, and that, let the older veteran guy kind of take the hit on the one loss record, if you will, while you kind of, teach another guy to be manager, which maybe is kind of what's going on with Rickie Weeks. But also, Rickie's title the last year has been with player development. And they were very clear, in the introductory press conference that, his role really is, motivation and player development. So I guess with that in mind, Ryan, a lot of teams shifting to this model of, player development not ending in the minor leagues and continuing the development at the major league level. Does that kind of give you a hint about their process and their priorities with these hires?
Yeah, that really does. It's what's interesting here is I think that's a big part of what they're doing. And I guess until you said that, that wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I think that the biggest thing in my mind was their priority here was continuity. And and keeping things kind of going the same way that they have been. And I think that was, and they said as much in the press conference that was true. Though I now see your point. Like, yeah, both Weeks and Murphy have sort of player development as a background, and so given what they're doing with their roster, that does make sense. So I see that more now, but I still think that like a big part of this was just like they're keeping things in-house and they're keeping continuity, and there are some pretty big pluses and minuses to that. I mean, on one hand, they have been extremely successful. They're either in the most successful period in franchise history here or the second most, depending on how you want to view that 78 to 82 run that they had. So they're either in the, you know, they're coming off of a period of success. And so like keeping continuity with that does have like something to recommend it, but it also feels a little bit like they're maybe trying to make a point here, and that gets squishier
Sure.
really quickly, right? Like that makes me uncomfortable, because if they're trying to make the point here that, hey, look, we have this up and running organization that's really, really good, and we can keep it running by just installing the guy who was the number 2 behind this manager that you all loved, but we didn't keep, then
Right.
okay, it sounds like you're trying to make a point there, and it's hard for me to escape the idea that this is something of a message send, and that feels like it's probably a bad idea. If that really is a motivation here, then that probably is not a good motivation to have. It can work maybe, but I don't know. That one, I definitely feel conflicted about that, because it does feel like, hey, Craig, watch this. There's a certain element to this decision that feels a lot like that, right?
Maybe. Yeah, I would say, or I would hope at least, that that's maybe just a side perk for Mark Atanasio and not a main driving factor.
Yes.
But who's
exactly.
to say, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. But the concern is there, right? Like you kind of worry about it, and yeah, that part of it. There's also just the aspect of we're going to conduct a rigorous search, a league-wide search for our next manager. We're going to leave no stone unturned. We're going to do a deep dive here. And oh look, the guy that we found who's the best for the job was sitting right here in our coaching staff all along. He was literally the second in command all along. And that always has a little bit of a, like, really, how rigorous was the search really if you just determined that the best guy for the job happened to be sitting right there all along anyway? Not that it can't work. These things do sometimes work. But it raises questions about the process, and it leaves you kind of going, like, was there a better option? Were there better ways they could have gone here? Yeah, we just have to wait and see. But it definitely raises those questions, at least for me. I don't know about you, Spencer.
I definitely agree with everything you said. Like you, I hadn't really looked at it from the player development standpoint, and I do think that's a really good point. And it is something that I think Weeks and Murphy should be able to bring to the table. So with the new kind of wave of young players coming in and guys that we have returning, it does make some sense from that standpoint for sure. I think that's a good way to look at it. I do think that there may have been some pettiness in the decision, which I don't always love, but I do think I like to point to the Bucks in this situation when they hired John Horst. I think they got knocked just for months on end because of the process they took to get to that decision. It seemed like nobody thought it was a good process. Sometimes a bad process actually ends in a good result. So while the process isn't exactly the way I would have probably gone through it, I do wonder how interested they were in Espada from the Astros. I think if he would have gotten out of Houston, that he may have been the guy they were the most interested in. He fits a lot of what they're looking for. But I also wonder just how much they kind of backed themselves into a corner by bringing the entire staff back before they even started interviewing new managerial candidates. Not that they couldn't still get out of those deals, but that would cost money. And two, I think most managers are going to want to at least bring part of their staff with them, or at least bring in some of their guys that they would want. They would probably have gotten the associate manager or the bench coach spot if a new manager came in, but I don't know that any of the other spots would have been super available for them to fill.
Yeah, I mean, well, what they could have done there was, first off, I don't think if Murphy doesn't get the managerial job, I don't think he stays. I think he goes.
No. Oh, I agree.
So, yeah, so that spot would have been open. And, yeah, like the positions that existed would have been, filled at least for a year or whatever. And I think that's, like, kind of appropriate. Like, I don't think managers would maybe they would have personal conflicts that would arise and they would need to make a change after year one. But they also, if there was somebody they really liked and they're like, hey, I really like this guy and I want them to be on my staff, just create a new position for them. Just like that's what we're doing in MLB these days. Staffs are just growing, like even non-San Francisco staffs are growing exponentially. It's just like they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Very true. To be fair, they have a pretty good staff coming back. I mean, guys like Walker McKinven, Chris Hook, those would be sought after names if they ended up in the open market. So it makes sense to make sure you can bring those guys back, and whoever the manager is, you would want people like that to be on the staff. So
absolutely.
All right. A couple of Patreon questions related to Pat Murphy here. Let's start with Morgoth 10 asking over under 2.5 Murph ejections coming this year. Ryan, you just had a gambling trip. So let's start with you.
I'm smashing that over. over hardcore. He got ejected a bunch of times as a bench coach. Like, like he is no stranger to ejections. I think he will be he'll be very comfortable with the idea of getting himself ejected. And yeah, I don't know who I was talking to. We were joking about it a little bit that like, that'll be Rickie Weeks' first chance to, be at the helm of a team and, and to run things. And hopefully he won't get the Dennis Hopper in Hoosiers thing where it's like, oh no, don't get yourself ejected. Don't leave me here. It's like that, that sort of thing. But yeah, I definitely take the over on that. I think he will get himself run a few times. I would say at least once against Council. Like those Cubs games, count on it at least once. He's going to be fired up. Everybody on that team is going to be fired up to beat the Cubs. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the guy got it. Didn't he get ejected for screaming at umpires like shortly after coming back from his massive heart attack? So it's like, dude, calm down.
Yeah, we also probably should mention that like, he did have a massive heart attack and like he's not in the like pristine perfect health here. But he also does have did you see the age of his kids? He's like a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's tough for those guys to calm down, but it's sort of reminiscent to me of when Greg Popovich would intentionally get thrown out of games. So Tim Duncan and Becky Hammock coached for a little bit. So there we go. Nothing like on the job experience. All right, Jack Bushman asking similarly, Spencer, how many WAR is Pat Murphy's mean mug worth? Man, it's a good look for a tough, grizzled old manager, right?
Oh yeah. It's an intimidating look. I would not want to get yelled at by Pat Murphy. I feel like that would be a terrible experience. I'll give him 0.1 WAR for his mean mug. I don't think it's negative. I don't think it's worth much, but I'll give him 0.1 for it.
A little something. Yeah.
I mean, Pat Murphy has manager face, right? Like that is exactly like you say, major league manager, you put a picture of that guy up there. You're like, yep, that's what a major league manager looks like. Sure is. So yeah, he definitely has the glower down. He has the mean mug down. He has the like the intensity look down. Like I'm here in great strain and great intensity. Hopefully he'll do okay with that. We're not going to get a big change in terms of the how stressed our manager looks during games.
Yeah.
Though I guess Murphy maybe is a little bit more stoic. So maybe it's a little bit. Craig like really wore like his anxiety on his face, and Murphy maybe be more stoic. But we'll see. He looks like a major league manager right out of Central Casting.
He's got resting manager face for sure. All right, Sean Griffin. Let's move on to Rickie Weeks. Sean Griffin asking, how common is the associate manager role that Rickie is in? What is the career path for someone in this role? Is it almost certain that this will lead to a managerial role? I think, Spencer, I mentioned he's basically manager in waiting, right? And reading between the lines, that's kind of the idea here is to kind of, get him some experience in the dugout in a managerial role without kind of giving him the title. What do you think that this associate manager role will entail going forward?
It definitely feels like it was a situation where they wanted to keep everything together. They liked Rickie Weeks as the potential manager, but they didn't think he was quite ready for it. So this is his way to get on the field. I mean, he's been in player development like we talked about. That's around the team, and he has been around the major league team at times. But it's not the same as being in the dugout and being part of the coaching staff full time. Like, I think you learn a lot more from being in that situation. I think the actual associate manager role probably isn't a very common one that they give that title to, but I do think that there are people basically playing that exact role. I think Joe Espada was doing that in Houston the last few years with Dusty Baker. Like, I think that was his role. He was just called the bench coach. So I think it is probably when they have somebody they like internally, I bet teams do this a decent amount, but it definitely feels like almost certainty that he will be the manager after Pat Murphy. I would be pretty surprised if he's not.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a weird thing about that, though, because you wonder if Murphy is successful, right? If the Brewers go to some playoff, maybe win some playoff games, unlike what had been happening lately, like if that happens, I think Murphy could stick around a little while, Like, we're not talking about if the Brewers have success under Murphy, they're winning in the regular season, they maybe win in the playoffs, he could be around another 5+ years pretty easily. If that's true, and if Weeks is viewed as a big part of that success, the chance of him getting poached by somebody else in the interim would seem relatively high, right? Like, if the Brewers have identified him as the manager in waiting, other teams are going to be taking notice of him and will look at him and say, okay, is this a guy we need to consider as well? And so I wonder if they're really successful here, if they do that. Alternatively, if Pat Murphy's tenure is a bad one, are you just going to say, okay, well, that's fine, we're just going to fire him and we're going to go on to the guy we have in waiting, and we're just going to do that, and that's perfectly fine. And it's sort of setting Weeks up in a situation where, like, okay, you got the job, but like the previous guy wasn't successful, and now you have to kind of turn it around. And even though you were on the staff before, that's also, I mean, it's not unprecedented. Fundamentally, Craig Counsell basically did that in 2015.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a slightly different model, but
same
general idea.
Counsell was in the front office; he wasn't actually
Right.
in the dugout. So in that way, it's different. But so there's precedent for it, but it's a little bit of a weird thing, right? Like that. So you kind of wonder about what the actual path looks like. What is the ideal path for this? I don't quite know what that looks like, but yeah. One thing, I'm sad. I'm very glad you're here, Spencer. We love having you on. I'm a little sad we don't get to hear Noonan go off about title creep in sports right now because
I mean, this is part of it, right? Maybe that's part of trying to keep him from being poached. Is like, title creep. You give a title. Titles often come with more money. So there's maybe that aspect of it too.
Yeah. So and it wasn't just this either, because they did the same thing with Walker McKinven. What was he? Yeah. He's the pitching, or no, he's the run prevention coordinator. Yep. So you got a run prevention coordinator. I think Jim Henderson was moved up from bullpen coach to associate pitching coach.
Yep. Which is the same thing. But anyway.
So you have this all across the staff, and It is too bad we didn't get here to go off about this, because he would have been funny about it. We'll have to see if we can remember it for next time we record. By the way, we probably are going. Unless something wild happens, I think we took care of basically all the news here. We're not going to be having a podcast over Thanksgiving, so we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, Matt Arnold definitely didn't want to be working over Thanksgiving, and that's why Pat Murphy's the manager.
Everything got done this week.
All right. Mark Podscarby, another Rickie Weeks question, asking, so it seems like it's clear Rickie Weeks is being groomed to be the heir apparent to Murphy. So what year do you believe Rickie Weeks will ascend to become the full-time manager? Matt Arnold said the number one thing he was looking for in a manager was he wanted the, quote, best human. If he truly wanted the best human, who do you think he would have hired for the job? So, we kind of touched on this briefly, but Spencer, what's the timeline here in your view of when Rickie would maybe take over the full-time job?
Yeah, I think Ryan made a good point that if Pat is having a lot of success that it may change the timeline. But I think the current one is probably 2 or 3 years. He got a 3-year deal. I think that's kind of what the Brewers are expecting to be the timeline. That doesn't mean it's going to be that timeline. Like Ryan said, it could be very successful. It could be very unsuccessful, and maybe that changes their plans. But I do think right now they're probably looking at a 2-3 year type of timeline and hoping that's when he would take over. In terms of the best human that they could have hired, Brandon Woodruff. That's my answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of praise for him as a human being. We got so many questions about that coming up. But I think the 2 to 3 year window makes a lot of sense. We've got so many questions. We'll keep rolling on this. Are there Nobel Peace Prize winners out there who'd like to manage who'd like to manage a Major League Baseball team who aren't also war criminals? Like, find one of those people. I don't know.
All right. Ian Pomplin asking, is Rickie Weeks, favorite childhood player, by the way, a Nepo baby hire based on his tenure at the club, or has he been doing baseball management things between his playing retirement and now? Haven't followed him too closely since he left the team. So I guess, Spencer, you want to talk a little bit about like his player development role and what that entails?
Yeah, so it's been 2 years, I believe. I think it's the last 2 seasons he's been back with the team in that player development role. I believe he's kind of been a roving type guy where he has been down in the minors, but he's also been with the major league club. So I think I don't think this is purely like, okay, he's a former Brewer, let's give him this job. I think there's a lot more to it. He's clearly earned respect in these 2 years that he's been back with the club, because they have a lot of guys who are kind of in that similar vein, where you have Carlos Villanueva, who's been there even longer, actually had some coaching experience in the minors. You have, who's the former Timber Rattlers coach? Forgetting his name.
Matt Erickson.
Matt Erickson. Yep. He's been with the org for a really long time. He's been in the MLB. He's been with the MLB team for the last 2 years now, and they still decided to kind of give Rickie this jump instead of either of those two. So I think it's not a Nepo type hire, I don't think. But I do think that he does have a lot to learn, probably, in terms of being on the field and being around the team full time. So that's really the main reason he's in this role, and maybe not the managerial one right away. But he has been around the team. He has been it sounds like he's been pretty involved in the player development the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. So he's definitely had a role. It isn't just, let's give him the job because he was a fun second baseman a decade ago.
Yeah, no, this is definitely like, here's your corollary to Craig Counsell, right? Because he was doing basically what Counsell was doing with the front office before he became the manager. The difference is that they hired Counsell at a time period when they knew they were headed into a rebuild. They knew Melvin was retiring. They knew that they were tearing the team down and that they were headed into a rebuild. And they figured, we'll let Craig learn on the job managerially and let him just, go take his lumps as he's doing that in real time. And that worked out, fabulously well for them, obviously. I think the difference here is they're not planning on going into a rebuild. That's not the plan here. This is a reload situation. This is not a rebuild situation. They think they can contend, if not immediately, very quickly here, and want to keep the train. They think the train is already very much on the tracks, and they want to keep it going. So yeah, this is not like that. I mean, it's no more a Nepo baby hire than Craig Counsell was originally. And there were people that did criticize the Craig Counsell hire as being like they should have gone outside the organization. Keith Law kind of famously pooped on that for several years before he was like, oh yeah, Craig Counsell's actually a really good manager. And they were right about that, even if I don't love their process. So yeah, I think this is fine. This is fine.
One more Rickie Weeks question before we move on to the other news of the week. Tom Haight asking, Rickie Weeks was anointed as the chosen one when he was drafted. Is he going to become manager in a few years and deliver a World Series? Or is this more like his Darth Vader moment where he makes all the young guys and rookies terrible and causes us to lose hope? So I don't know, Ryan.
I don't see him killing the young players, like murdering them. So
the Rickie Weeks Death Star. Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, like the going into the temple and killing the younglings. No, I don't see Rickie Weeks going in and doing that. So hopefully won't literally work out that way. But no, I mean, yeah, there was an interesting thing. So Rickie Weeks was the Golden Spikes winner 20 years ago now. And he still is the all-time NCAA leader in terms of batting average. And I made the comment on Twitter when I saw that. I think JJ Cooper put that out there, that like he's been wearing that millstone around his neck ever since, because people were expecting him to come in and be like a 350 hitter, and that was never going to be his game. He was always going to, take a lot of walks. He was going to strike out and hit for power. And like people were expecting this high batting average because of what they saw in college. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting because it was like, yeah, that was 20 years ago. And he has some experience dealing with, when success didn't come right away for him, of having to work his butt off. I mean, he and Willie Randolph really worked to turn him into for a few years there before his injuries really piled up. He was an above average defender for a few years there after being really dreadful when he came up. And he also had to go through a lot in terms of, figuring out how to hit big league pitching, especially how to deal with that slider away. He had to deal with a lot before he became finally in like 2009, 2010, 2011, the above average hitter that we had, projected him and hoped he was going to be. So he's gone through a lot. And I think, having had to being highly touted and then having to go through growing pains and having to go through things, I think he can bring that experience to players, because everybody's going to go through development ups and downs. Like that's just, it's part of the game. And he, I think, has a really, having done it, I think he can bring that to players. Nothing ever came easy for Rickie. He really had to work his butt off to get where he was. So, I think that's a positive thing he could bring to the whole development scheme here.
Especially with such a young crew of players coming in, as you guys talked about, right? Like, in addition to the last year's, so-called freshmen, the Jackson Churios of the world too, who will, like Rickie, will be coming in with, all this fanfare. Churio, probably the most, highly touted prospect the Brewers have had since Rickie Weeks. I think that'll be a helpful presence to have around for sure. All right, let's move on to the other big news of the week. Obviously, Brandon Woodruff getting non-tendered by the Brewers. Probably not surprising. Still a really kind of sucky moment as a fan to go through, just realizing that this is probably the end of his time in Milwaukee. Yeah, the Brewers had the statement where they said they hope to bring him back, but obviously you're not going to non-tender him if you tried and failed to get a contract done. So I think writing kind of on the wall here, but a couple of questions about Brandon Woodruff. First one coming from Nick Vollendorf asking, or saying the Brewers have non-tendered Brandon Woodruff due to his recent surgery and the expected long recovery from that. My questions are regarding insurance. Don't ball clubs buy insurance so they don't have to pay injured players' salaries? Since no team is likely to sign him until he's healthy again, does Woody have insurance to cover medical bills and his lack of income? So I guess, Ryan, any insight there?
Yeah, okay. So this works differently in different sports. First off, Brandon Woodruff, I'm looking at his baseball reference page, and according to that, he's made just shy of $22 million in his major league career so far. So Brandon Woodruff, in terms of having money already, he has, unless he's a total spendthrift, he's got some money. So, like, he's not going to be destitute because of this. Like, he does have that to fall back on. The insurance thing is tricky because it used to be much more common that teams would buy insurance for players for these big contracts. And then if things went badly, those insurance payments would be paid out. I'm trying to think of some of the famous ones. Maybe Albert Bell was one. There are some ones that go back where like teams were collecting big amounts of money on these insurance payments for things that went bad. I think Prince Fielder is one, or was one. His just recently ran out. But it's been a lot harder for teams lately. This is something that's come up. You'll hear that teams haven't been able to get insured for some of these contracts, and so they're like basically having to kind of fly naked on them. They can't get people to insure contracts. I think I heard that in the context of Jacob deGrom and his contract with the Rangers. that like nobody was willing, or the premiums would have been so high that it basically just didn't make any sense for them to do it, because at that point you're just planning on it not working. Like if you're paying the premiums that it would take to do it, you're basically just planning on it failing. And what's the point of doing it if you're just planning on it failing? So you just don't have any upside then, right? Like it's just it's sort of pointless. So in terms of what the players do now, what my expectation is here, and I think what other people's expectation is as well, he is going to find a team somewhere, as long as the medicals aren't a complete and utter disaster. He's going to find somebody to give him some sort of like nominal amount for this year, nominal, a couple $1 million probably, $2-3 million, something like that, for this year to rehab, and then get kind of a discount on 2025 and maybe like a team option for 2026. I don't know. The Brewers, it sounds like, were trying to do this. They were trying to work out something with him. They were also shopping him to other teams who would have had to have done the same thing, right? Like they would have done the same thing. And I think it's really important that we understand here. Spencer, you were talking about this. A number of people, smart people on Twitter who get this, were talking about this. The Brewers didn't really have much of a choice here. If they couldn't work out a multi-year deal, tendering Brandon Woodruff was not an option. That just really, all that does, if you are planning on him missing all of next year, which is basically, I think if you get anything out of him next year, it would sort of be surprising. Everybody is planning on him missing next year, at least. With him, being 1 year away from free agency, you would just be taking that full salary. If you tendered him, he would be entitled to the full, 11.5 to 12 million, whatever it was. He would be entitled to that. And then he would be a free agent after that. And there's really no upside for that. In the past, we've seen the Brewers did tender Jimmy Nelson in sort of a similar situation where he had shoulder surgery after the slide back to first in Chicago. Heavy sigh. After that happened. But the difference there was Jimmy Nelson was headed into his first year of arbitration. So one, the money was a lot less. It was only, $3.8 million. But the other thing that was going on there was years after that they would have been able to, have him on the team and would have been able to keep him around. This is a situation where the timing of this was perfectly awful for Woodruff and for the Brewers and for everybody. There's never a good time to have a shoulder capsule injury, to be fair. But the timing of this one was perfectly bad because it just didn't leave a lot of wiggle room. So now he is free to go out there and find a team to give him that 2-year deal that we've kind of been talking about and see what it is. And, my gut feeling on this is that the medical situation is not looking particularly promising, because if it was looking promising, I feel like the Brewers would have done a deal already, or somebody would have traded for him before the non-tender deadline and would have done the deal with him. I think baseball is kind of telling us right now, and we'll see if this holds up, but baseball is telling us right now that there's at least a lot of uncertainty about what Brandon Woodruff's health outlook looks like. And that sucks, but it also, it kind of is what it is, right?
Yeah, it's like you said, just the worst possible timing for all parties involved, and that's where you end up with this difficult decision. Next question on Woodruff comes from JD, who's asking, where would you rank Woodruff in terms of best starting pitchers in Brewers history? I think I'd have him just behind Higuera in Sheets, just ahead of Caldwell, Gallardo, and Burns. So I guess, Spencer, where does he slot in your, I guess, Mount Rushmore of Brewers pitchers?
He's definitely on the Mount Rushmore. I would definitely say he's on there. I would agree with that. Obviously, Caldwell, Higuera, a little bit before my time, but I know a decent amount about them. Higuera might be the only one I would be willing to move Woodruff into second on that list, honestly. Burns obviously had the Cy Young, which gives him a nice kind of boost, but he also had the 2019 that kind of drags him right back down. So for me, Woodruff's my favorite pitcher I've ever had around on the Brewers. I just loved watching him compete. He was a bulldog. everything I don't like about Corbin Burnes at times is what I loved about Brandon Woodruff. He just went out.
It's a
He
good way to put it.
attacks hitters. He goes out. He trusts his stuff. He does not have any concerns about just going after guys and trying to get outs. And I love that about him. He was always ready to take the ball in a big spot in a big game, even when he was a reliever, even the NLCS in 2018, which we have a question about in a second. But he always kind of seemed like he was ready for that spot. So for me, he's my favorite. I guess if I were ranking him, he's probably 2 or 3 overall. But yeah, it sucks. Friday sucked. It was not fun.
Yeah, it was a tough day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird. So, like, first off, I think you have to compare them to Burnes because they're basically contemporaries. They came up at almost the same time. And Woodruff was the steadier one, though he hasn't pitched as much as Burnes. So, like, steady in terms of performance, because you've seen these ups and downs from Burnes, especially related to the home runs, where it's like, there's, good Burnes, bad Burnes. 2019, Woodruff doesn't have a 2019 on his resume, not even close. So there's nothing like that there. But he didn't, pitch as much, which I guess kind of fits with the standard Brewers pitcher thing. Ben Sheets, what would have been if not for the injuries? Teddy Higuera, what would have been if not for the injuries? Like, this really is sort of fitting into the standard Brewers mold of of pitchers that way. But yeah, I mean, I think he's better than Gallardo. I think he's better than Caldwell's a hard one. Like, I really don't have a context for Caldwell other than just looking at the numbers on the page. Like, that's a really tough one. But yeah, I think he's kind of, him and Burnes are an interesting duo and will go down in Brewers history together because, like, their careers basically overlapped each other. And I think, they offer some interesting contrasts with each other while both being really good in their own ways. Like, Woodruff was never as good as Burnes was at his peak. Like, so that also, wasn't there. Yeah, I think that, like, those two kind of belong. If I was going to do a Mount Rushmore, so we're talking 4 faces, because they decided not to add any more faces to Mount Rushmore. Yeah, I think it would be Sheets, Higuera, Burnes, and Woodruff at this point. Yeah.
I guess more questions on historical context. Steve DeRozier saying, James, hey, that's me, tweeted that Brandon Woodruff hitting a home run off Clayton Kershaw in the NLCS is a top 5 moment in the 50-plus year history of the Brewers. I agree 100%. What do you think are the other top moments in Brewers history, if that's a top 5 spot? So, I told you guys, obviously, I probably have recency bias just because I don't remember much, if any, of the 90s. Not that there was many top moments for the Brewers in the 90s, and I definitely, missed the 80s and the 70s. So, for me, it's probably very recent stuff, but also this being one of the most successful runs in the Brewers history, I feel like that's kind of warranted too. So I guess outside of Woodruff and that reaction, it's, a bunch of Ryan Braun home runs, the grand slams, the grand slam against the Cubs, the home run to clinch the division title in 2011 against the Marlins. You had Corey Hart, like, just celebrating at second base and frame once he made contact. That was great. CC's complete game, similarly to clinch that, and that reaction. I don't know. Spencer, how about you?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously, kind of before our time, if we have to talk about big moments, Cooper's hit in the ALCS, a huge one. Robin's 3,000th is a huge one.
Yep.
But for me, obviously, I was 10 in 2008, so that's kind of the first year I really, really remember everything that was going on in that and kind of could feel the magnitude of what was happening. So that game, 162, just in general, I mean, the Braun homer, Brian Anderson's voice crack on that.
Yeah.
Like, even at the time, you could just feel how cool that was. Even as a 10-year-old, I knew, like, the energy in that place and the energy from everybody around. My great grandpa was moving around as much as I'd seen him at that point when that ball went out. Like, everybody was so excited about that moment. To me, that's one of the biggest in Brewers history, kind of like the Woodruff homer, where it was just everybody exploded at once. And those moments are the ones I think of for this type of question. The double play to end the game was huge, obviously, but for me, the home run kind of, I feel that part more. I remember that part a little more vividly. I think Ben Sheets, 18 strikeouts. I was also with my great grandpa for that one, watching that game. So that game was, that was a huge, I just remember watching it. And I mean, when I watched the highlights looking back, man, those zones were huge.
Yeah, they were.
I cannot believe how big strike zones were in the early 2000s. But he was dominating, and the shadows and everything were helping that along. But he was just shoving that day. And so that's, to me, that's always up there. Prince Fielder's first homer for me it was a great call, too, I think.
Matt Excursion. Yeah.
No, it was Sutton.
No, was it Sutton?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
it
was
was
Garrett Sutton. Yeah.
Yeah. Both cheesy in their own ways. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Prince will soon be king. Yeah. Okay. He rehearsed that one.
Well, Prince and Weeks in the same game. Like, that's not one singular moment, but that game also, because it has the famous Ryan Braun interview in it.
Yeah.
So they're interviewing Ryan Braun, and Weeks and Fielder hit their first career home runs. It really did feel like it's happening. They're arriving, and it's going to be great. And yeah.
I mean, about Niger Morgan's walk off also.
Yeah, Niger Morgan's walk off. That's true.
Yeah, that was kind of my list. Like the two playoff wins. So Cooper's hit, bringing in the winning run there, and then Morgan's walk off. So those have to be up there. I think the double play to end that game was CC just standing and like going nuts on the mound, like that. The
I still
double
love that
arm
bobblehead.
flex. Yeah, like that is indelible. Like that is just part of the team history. And I mean, after having not made the playoffs in 26 years, that moment is so like, and ultimately it was like there's so many images to take away from that day. One I will never forget is Mark with goggles on running down the hallway with all the players doused in champagne and like all of that. I always remember that because he looked like such a dork. It was great. Obviously Robin's 3,000th hit. I don't remember watching it. I don't even know if it was on TV in Madison. We got very sketchy Brewers coverage still at that point, but I do remember like the lead up to it, that like it was such a big deal. Like we knew it was coming, and it was such a big deal that it was happening, and that, you know, it was all of those. A lot of these were the ones that I mentioned here. Yount's diving catch to end the Nieves no-hitter is a big one, even if he didn't need to dive. Like that he was hamming it up on that one, but still, you know, that's a cool moment. The 5 home run inning in 2006, I believe, where that was like, this group, they are announcing their arrival in a big, big way. So he had 5 home runs in an inning, which was, I think, tied the major league record at the time. More recently, the Kane Not Today to open on opening day against the Cardinals was at 2019.
Yes.
Yep.
Like, you know, because
it was one of those. Yeah. 2019 was Yelich walk off, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like Kane's doing that one of those opening days, having the Not Today. That's a pretty special one. Like those are kind of the biggies. Woodruff's dinger. I was not in my seat in the stadium for that one.
No.
I was at the bar, and because it was a Friday night, and like we were tying one on, and so we were back at the bar behind the stands, and just everybody who was standing there to buy stuff starts immediately pounding on the bar, and it just got so unbelievably loud in that place. That was something special. The Woodruff thing really was something special. So it doesn't quite, you know, have the impact of some of these really big moments in franchise history, because it didn't actually win a playoff series or anything like that, but it's in that next tier, and it's definitely like one of the things people are going to take away, which is almost sad in a way, because Brandon Woodruff was a great pitcher. He didn't need to hit a home run to be like remembered, but because of the context of all of that, yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Next question this week comes from Jay Google talking about the other pitcher tied with Brandon Woodruff in Brewers history, Corbin Burns. So Jay's question here, with Burns' comments the other day, it's now time to move him, right? Also, which of the 5 deals that the great Jim Bowden suggested would you take? So
I got this.
Yeah, I believe these are the deals. So Baltimore, Kobe Mayo, D.L. Hall, Chase McDermott, and Dylan Beavers. You got the Dodgers, right-hander Emmett Sheehan and Ryan Pepio. Could be, possibly the foundation of a blockbuster deal, or a package of 19-year-olds Peyton Martin and Kendall George, who was a first-round pick in 2023, or outfielder Andy Pajes and third baseman Jake Galoff, a second-rounder last year. Then you've got Arizona with lefty Yu-Min Lin, their best pitching prospect, and outfielder Jack Hurley, their third-round pick in this year's draft, maybe even Christian Robinson. Texas, you've got Leody Taveras, Justin Foscue, and Josh Steffen. And San Francisco, right-hander Carson Whisenhunt, outfielder Jairo Pomares, and infielder Diego Velazquez. So a lot of names there. I don't know how likely any of them are because they all seem very rich for 1 year of Corbin Burns. Ryan, you're nodding your head. What do you think?
Yeah, it's exactly what my reaction was. Jay and I were talking about this earlier this week, and it was just like, I honestly, any of these kind of could work. I don't know much about the Arizona one. That's the one I have the most. You may have more insight into that one than I do, Spencer, but some of these seem pretty pie in the sky. Like, he sort of acknowledges the San Francisco wouldn't want to deal Carson Whisenhunt, but here he is in the deal anyway. And we'll throw in a couple other players along with him anyway.
I'd take any of these immediately just on the surface, and I'm not a big prospect guy. So
yeah. No, there's definitely some just, this seems hopelessly overdoing it. I don't think any of these teams necessarily would be willing to do any of these deals. It's kind of like, well, I'd slam on any of these, but no, that's over asking, I think, which really does say something about where Jim Bowden is at, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I agree, though. I would not be opposed to any of these. For the Arizona one, Yu-Min Lin's pretty young, but he's like chucking upper 90s, touching triple digits at like 19, 20 years old already. And Hurley was actually a guy I really wanted the Brewers to take in the draft this last year, so I would enjoy that. Christian Robinson, I believe, is the guy who has had some off-the-field issues, so I'm not sure I would even – I could just take him out of that deal and still be fine with the return. Honestly,
the Christian Robinson thing, it's a wild story. You can look up and see exactly what happened, but it involved him punching some police officer and having pretty severe mental health issues, and then not being allowed back into the country because he wasn't a citizen. So he basically was kept out of the country for quite a while and lost a lot of development time because he had, like I said, he basically was having like a psychotic episode and punched a police officer, and that ended very poorly for him.
I think the point being here is if Corbin Burns is traded, you all are going to be pretty disappointed in the return. And it's not a sign that Matt Arnold sucks. It's just like stuff like this thrown out by bad former GMs does not help the perception of the final deal, right?
Sure doesn't. Yeah, this raises the expectation and raises the bar on what people think you could get for 1 year of anybody. But Burns wasn't, at his best last year, but 1 year of anybody isn't going to bring you. I don't think that these deals, things like this, most of this wouldn't get you Juan Soto for a year, let alone like Corbin. This is bad. This is very, very bad. Jim Bowden is bad. Like, do not recommend. Do not recommend. No.
Not even to mention that he is now a Boris client, so they're not extending him if they trade for him, except also maybe the Dodgers. I mean,
but even then, they're going to head to he's going to want to test free agency or get such. You're going to have to give him such a big deal that it would it would dwarf whatever like anybody would reasonably expect. Sure, you could offer him $350 million over 12 years or something, and I'm sure he would take that. But yeah, like who would give up a ton of prospects and then do that? The Chicago Bears play in the NFL,
Chicago
not
Bears.
an MLB.
I was going to say, yes. We needed a Bears to, trade for somebody and then give him a market value contract before free agency. That's exactly what we need. But yeah, not happening. All right. Speaking of things that actually did happen, it was a busy week on the transaction front. So, Lucroy Suitcase, a question here. Which trade this week are you most excited about? Do any of these random minor leaguers or 4A guys get you going? So, just to kind of sum things up, Brewers have acquired Jake Bowers from the Yankees for Jace Avina and Brian Sanchez, Chad Patrick from the A's for Abraham Toro, Oliver Dunn from the Phillies for Henry Mendez and Robert Moore. They also signed Yanni Hernandez, Anoli Paredes, and Jared Koenig to minor league contracts, and they added Jefferson Caro and Bradley Blaylock to the 40-man roster ahead of the deadline to protect guys from the Rule 5. So, some of these guys, Abraham Toro, most notably, Spencer traded because he's going to be non-tendered and you just get something for him. But like I tweeted, this is where I just turn to you and be like, anything interesting about any of these guys?
The more I looked at it, I do like Oliver Dunn. I actually think that could be a pretty interesting pickup for the Brewers. He was injured in the Yankees organization for his first few years after being drafted. He was actually drafted in the minor league Rule 5 last year by the Phillies, but he stepped in and actually showed a huge uptick in power. He takes a ton of walks, and while he does strike out a decent amount, he actually doesn't swing and miss at an insane rate, which to me means he is probably kind of passive at times, and you get the walks with that, but you also can get taking too many strikes or taking too many hittable pitches. That, to me, is something that you can work around a lot more easily than someone who has a really high swinging strike rate. So I think there could be a pretty good bat. I saw some people say like a Jason Kipnis comp at his best. That would be a really good turnout, obviously, but I could kind of see a Scooter type of hitter in there, which with more walks. So to me, that's a pretty good bat for somebody who I was pretty low on Mendez and Moore. Especially, I was always low on Moore. I didn't like that pick. I wasn't a huge fan of the pick from the beginning. Mendez, there's a huge ceiling there, but he has a long way to go. He's going to need a swing change. And kind of honestly, since he got concussed in Carolina 2 years ago, he has been struggling pretty bad since he came back. So I wonder if there are some long-term effects from all the injuries he's had. But I know that people kind of freaked out because they were two top 30 pipeline prospects. To me, they were not. Neither of them were top 30 in the Brewers organization. I wouldn't put either of them in the top 30. So, and Dunn, I would put Dunn probably around 20. So I think he could challenge for the second base job next year and right away out of spring training. The bat could be there. He seems decent enough defensively. I don't think he's ever going to be insanely good there, but he's got a decent arm. He moves pretty well. I think he could steal more bases than he did in Philadelphia. Somebody pointed this out to me. The Phillies AA organization stole like the third fewest bases in all of AA. And he went to the AFL and went 12 for 12. And I also saw that, and I also saw that he's run a 6.5 60-yard dash, which is very good. It's straight line speed. It's not the exact same, but I think there might be more stolen base potential than he was showing with the Phillies just because they don't seem to be in on attempting to steal, which means he didn't get as many chances to go out and do it. So he's super interesting to me. I kind of like that trade a lot. The others, they're trades. But
I was hoping you would leave that one for me because, Dunn is obviously the most interesting of these guys. Like by leaps and bounds, he's the most interesting guy here. And I really am interested to hear you say the swinging strike rate is low. Like that is key. And yes, I think it is easier to coach guys to be a little bit more aggressive and to work on like pitch selection than it is to oftentimes to fix when guys are just whiffing a ton. That can be a tougher nut to crack. So I'm super excited about that. I do want to get your opinion because you did put it on Twitter. So we do need to talk a little bit about Chad Patrick because
Sure.
there's something there. He has a really good cutter, if I'm remembering your write-up correctly.
Yeah, or at least it's classified as one. It almost seems more slider-ish. It's kind of like mid-80s instead of where his fastball is like 92 to 94, and when a cutter is mid-80s, to me, that's more he's trying to throw a slider, and it might just be classified as a cutter. But I think it was like a 35% whiff rate on it in AAA, which is it's pretty solid. He also Fangraphs said that it's commanded extremely well. Like he can land that pitch when he wants it. He can get it for swing and miss out of the zone. I kind of wonder if they take almost a Hunter Strickland type approach where he just comes in and throws a ton of sliders, and that's the way they go with him now. And then the fastball is just mix it in, keep hitters off balance, and that's almost a change of pace. But it's an interesting arm. Anytime the Brewers go out and get an arm, you can always find something that they have at least a little interest in. And
a type. Yeah.
Yeah, you almost always have to take note when they go out and trade for an arm. They have a pretty good track record of finding guys who they can kind of tinker with and just maybe make into a possible, even just a up and down shuttle arm where he impacts the MLB team and helps at least a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I'm looking at this. He started last year, and his numbers as a starter were not so great. Well, okay, so is the move coming? And then what do you see happening there? That definitely also intrigues me. When you look at some of these strikeout to walk ratios, are very they grab my attention to see the big time split between the strikeout and the walk numbers. But also some real problems giving up hits and especially some real home run problems. So, but some of that stuff can go away by eliminating the second and third time through the order. I was trying to find a first, second, third time through the order split, and I don't have it here on Baseball Reference. So I don't have that. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff here, definitely. It looks like he misses a lot of bats. So positive there. On some of the other things before we move on real quick. Yeah, obviously we knew they were going to select Jefferson Caro. I missed Bradley Blaylock last week, and I feel dumb about that. I was complaining how dumb I felt for missing because that was part of the deal when they acquired Blaylock in exchange for Luis Urias, who, by the way, was
traded again.
Was traded again. Yeah, instead of being non-tendered, he was traded. But Blaylock is a guy that they acquired and I think pretty highly of. So we should have talked about that last week. I feel very dumb for missing that. That was bad.
No, but like we had Spencer on right after that trade, right? And you kind of highlighted, Spencer, some of the things that they might have seen with Blaylock there as well, right?
Yeah, he's interesting. I think they made the right choice protecting him. I think he's the type of guy that a team would go out and try to hide on an MLB roster. He kind of has, I think the fastball could probably already play at MLB level. The breaking ball, people are split on whether the slider or the curveball is better, but there's reports of both of them being plus or at least above average at times, which means if the Brewers figure out which one they like more, they could potentially say, all right, we're going to hide you for a 2-pitch pitcher in the pen. If they're both decent, can make it through a season pitching in kind of garbage time outings, especially on a team like the A's or something like that. So
right.
I do think it was worth protecting him. And he did add a splitter last year that people are saying is looking pretty good at times. It's obviously that's a tough pitch to find the command of right away, but they said it moves a lot and that he was finding the command later in the season as he went along. So he could be a 4-pitch guy who has a fastball that gets up to 97. And that's in a starting role. So it's a pretty interesting arm. The Red Sox actually got an interesting arm back for Urias also. So teams still value him apparently, at least a little bit, but I think the Brewers did pretty well there. And I definitely think they made the right decision protecting him.
Yeah. So looking at the guys that they brought in, there were a couple minor league pitchers that guys who haven't pitched in the big leagues yet, who they signed to minor league deals. Those are always interesting dart throws to see what the team ends up doing with guys like that because of this history that they have with developing guys. But I did want to talk about Yanni Hernandez just a little bit because he has been in the big leagues each of the last 3 years, at least a little bit. Though he has bounced from team to team to team here. He went from Texas in 2021 to Arizona in 22 to the Dodgers last year, and he hasn't stuck anywhere. And so you start to wonder, like, oh, is this a guy that just, for one reason or another, teams just see talent and then they go, okay, well, we're going to give up on this because it's not going to happen. I guess it's the Brewers' turn to see if they can try to spin straw into gold here. And I'm looking at it. It looks like he's a fairly decent defender. He had a positive defensive run in 2021 when he got 166 plate appearances with the Rangers. But yeah, the offensive numbers so far in his big league career, 190, 286, 222. So nothing stands out really as a big positive there. But this does seem like a guy who's talented. It's just a question of can they get something out of him, more than what other teams have, right?
Yeah, he appears to have really good bat to ball skills, and he's a patient enough hitter where he makes good swing decisions, but it just seems like he has no punch in the bat. My first thought was like, oh, maybe he's kind of like Andrew Monasterio. So I went and compared their AAA StatCast data.
Sure.
And the hard hit rate for Monasterio was like 5 or 6 times as much as it was for Hernandez. So that kind of killed that theory. I was like, oh no. So he really just has nothing in the bat in terms of power, but it seems like kind of the guy you're looking at when you go for AAA depth. It's someone who he's said to be a smart base runner. He's not very fast, but he steals a decent amount of bases. So people said he's super aggressive, and it almost sounded like Luis Arias to me, where he thinks he's faster than he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yikes.
But the defense is pretty legitimate, and it can handle third, short, and second, which is a good guy to have at AAA, where you just need guys to fill in a lot of the times just to keep the lineup moving or let guys get days off. And it sounds like clubhouse guy, like people really like him, another type of person you want at AAA. So I don't know. I think he's just depth. I can't imagine he's at all what I don't think they want to see him in the majors next year. I do actually think that one of the pitchers they signed, Enoli Paredes, could impact the major leagues next year. He actually does have MLB experience. He's pitched in parts of 3 years, and with the Astros was I believe that was the main team he was with during those times. So, but he's mid-90s with his fastball, and it's pretty high spin stuff, including a breaking ball that's like close to 3,000 RPMs. And I don't have it up right now, but I believe even his MLB ERA is a little over 3. It's not, it kind of reminds me of when they signed, who was the, who balked against the Giants. Can't remember his name. He got called for a balk that lost him the game in 2022, and I can't remember his name. He reminds me of him. It was a guy who had kind of decent surface stats, even at the MLB level, but he just hadn't ever gotten a real opportunity.
Sure.
And yeah, he's interesting to me. I could definitely see him helping the Brewers bullpen at some point next year.
This is interesting. So he didn't pitch in 2023 in the major leagues, but he did in 2020. He got in 20 innings with all these are with the Astros, and a 3.05 ERA. Not great strikeout to walk numbers, not at all. But the Brewers sometimes deal with that and are fine with it. If a guy's coming at it from like a funky delivery perspective, they'll deal with that and make it work. And then, just only 8 innings and 3 innings in 2021 and 2022. So not much after that, but interesting. Okay. I didn't catch that he had pitched in the big leagues because he wasn't in there last year.
All right. Moving on, we got a few more questions here. I guess speaking of guys who have bounced around in multiple minor league organizations, Jake Bauers, probably the most notable, at least in terms of name recognition, guys that they brought back in those trades, just because, he was a Yankee and Yankee fans complained about him a lot on Twitter. But Kevin Stern asking, am I wrong in thinking Jake Bauers isn't an upgrade over Rowdy Tellez? Why does this team keep throwing spaghetti at first base when it's clear they need guys to rake at the corners? Should we expect Tyler Black to take over first base at some point in the 2024 season? So, I guess real quick, Spencer, your thoughts on Jake Bauers, and is he just spaghetti on the wall, as Paul likes to say, or is there still something there that could be untapped?
I think it's probably both. I think it is just taking a chance, but he did make some changes when he got to the Yankees. I think Jack Stern tweeted a picture out, but he closed his stance up and he's more upright, and his batted ball data did improve quite a bit after that. His hard hit rate was 48.7%, and on balls in play, he had a expected weighted on base average of 490, which is very good. He tripled his barrel rate from the year prior to all the way up to 18.7%. So the issue is that he had a 34.9% strikeout rate. So
yeah,
when he made contact, he hit the ball hard and he hit it. He had 12 homers and 272 plate appearances. But I think the Brewers must think, okay, we might be able to get the ball to be a little bit better. And they probably think the power jump is legitimate. He is hitting the ball much harder than he ever has. I'm sure they think kind of like they took a chance with a guy like Rowdy.
Mm-hmm.
It was someone who had shown promise in the past. He was kind of getting blocked. He had better batted ball data than he had actual results. I think they're taking a shot on him, just possibly finding that power a little more consistently, or finding the bat to ball a little more consistently. I did feel like it was a pretty decent price to pay for Jake Bauers.
Yeah,
I do like Jay Savina. Kind of reminds me of Bauers at the lower levels. He did have strikeout problems, but those improved a lot over the season as it went. He struck out much less after the first month or two, and the power was there. Good athlete. For the Yankees, it's a good idea on their part to try this. There's no reason not to take someone like Avina back for Bauers. But I do get what the Brewers are looking at. Even if you do say it's the same as Rowdy, you're getting him at like a quarter of the price. So
sure.
I guess why not take that shot? And in terms of Tyler Black, I do think there's a pretty decent chance that ends up being what happens. But I also think right now, Tyler Black would probably be your third baseman rather than first base. And I'm not sure that's the best idea, but I think he could do it. And I think that's probably where it would, if this offseason ended today, that's probably more how it would line up.
Yeah, I think this is mostly a speculative thing too, and the Brewers have shown they paid Abraham Toro last year, 1.2 million, 1.1, somewhere in that neighborhood, and barely had him on the big league roster. He was depth. And he actually, when he did come up, he was good. He hit well. So the idea that like Bauers is somehow slotted into the roster at this point, I think is a huge leap. I don't think that there's a pretty good chance we never see Jake Bauers, or we see him on such a limited basis that it doesn't end up really impacting. And I think they're once again, they're lining up spaghetti to throw at the wall and see if something sticks, to see if they can get, maybe Bauers does have like a hot run of 200 plate appearances or something over a couple months where he is just smacking the crap out of the ball and they are able to get, a good run out of him. I think it's that sort of a thing. They're trying to give themselves an option and depth. Remember how much they struggled to try to find somebody who could play first base this last year, because it was like everything they tried. Rowdy got hurt. Darren Ruff got hurt. Luke Voigt was terrible. John Singleton wasn't good with us. So it was just every single thing that they tried at that position went wrong. But a hallmark of this management team and what they do is to build up depth. And Jake Bauers is depth. I don't think he's necessarily slotted in anywhere at this point. It's just depth.
Yeah, and I think it's a decent, gamble to make, considering the Brewers also like their post-type prospects, right? And Jake Bauers was a former top 100 guy, was a piece in a couple significant trades. He was in the Trey Turner to Washington trade.
Yep.
He was in the Edwin Encarnacion Carlos Santana swap. Like he's a guy who, prospect folks like Ryan have been aware of for a long time. He just hasn't really put it together. But sometimes the Brewers do like to find those 26-year-old late bloomers, so to speak. So decent roll of the dice there. Of course, that move accompanied Rowdy Tellez, formerly being non-tendered, kind of expected, not super surprising, but still, tough to see sometimes those favorite characters of ours go. Ian Pomplin asking in memoriam to Rowdy Tellez, what's your favorite memories from his 3 seasons with the club? I think for me, it starts with a walk-off grand slam, Spencer, but what do you think?
Probably the go-ahead homer against the Braves in that NLDS Game 1. That was the stadium was, I believe, already chanting Rowdy as he was at the plate, and then he hit the 2-run homer to take the lead. Like, that's a cool moment. That's probably one of my favorite memories. And honestly, I just really enjoyed his interviews.
Yeah.
His dry sense of humor is that's my sense of humor. Like, I love dry humor. So he always made me laugh when I would listen to him messing with reporters or teammates or whoever. But he was a really good guy. I think he was a good teammate. It kind of sucks that he just stopped hitting in 2023. There was a chance I thought he might break out and have a really big season offensively, and he went the complete opposite way. So sucks to see, but that's kind of what happens when you have guys like him and you're trying out different things all the time.
Yeah, recency bias is all over this one, but the relief pitching outing. I mean, come on. We will all remember that forever.
Division. Yes, exactly.
It clinched the division, and it was amazing. Like, it was something special. So that one will always live in the heart. But yeah, he hit some big dingers. Like, the dude was capable of hitting and pulling the ball. Not hitting opposite field home runs, which was great. Like, he could actually do what, big first baseman, you kind of think what they're going to do, which is hit the ball a really far distance. And he did that. And it's a good sort of way to remember that, the Brewers have been really good at finding guys like Rowdy in, relatively minor trades. Throughout this tenure of Stearns and Arnold, they've done this over and over and over again, and you take and put those guys and plug them in. Daniel Vogelbach also got non-tendered the other day. So
he did. Yep.
Maybe we see him come back. I'm just kidding. But actually, who knows? Whatever. There's a place for rotating through guys like this on your roster, because you're not going to have strength everywhere, and to be able to do this where you're getting a considerable amount of production out of first base, despite paying them nothing and giving up nothing to get them, for the most part, that's a very good thing to be able to do, and something that the Brewers are going to have to do to be competitive, because you're not going to have superstars at every position.
All right, moving on, because we still got a few questions to get through, and we've run really long this week with all the news.
We knew it was going to be long. We knew.
I know. All right, Brian Polakowski asking, with the team as currently constituted, let's hear some way too early record predictions. I'll start with 85 wins in the last wild card spot, which Murphy gets the crew hot going all the way to the World Series, losing in 7 to preserve the playoff streak of losing to the other World Series appearing team. I guess current roster, Spencer, how many wins are you seeing?
Well, I have to give this will not be their roster when they get to spring training.
It won't be.
But the current roster, I do think they could probably be a 500-ish team with the current roster. It's still the NL Central that they're playing in. We don't know what other teams are going to do during the offseason. The Cubs definitely sound like they're going to be willing to go out and spend a lot of money.
But as currently constituted, the Cubs just lost Marcus Stroman, their second best starter, and their best hitter. So they would be worse than the Brewers as currently constituted, I think. So,
it's a hard question to answer that way, but I would say, I mean, 85 wins doesn't sound wrong to me with the current roster. I could see that happening.
Yeah, given all the deficiencies elsewhere in the division, like, I mean, it's like us and the Reds, because we know that the Cubs are going to spend. We know the Cardinals are going to go out and have to buy some starting pitching. Like, we know that's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So if we're taking the hit on the current roster, then they do too. So, yeah, 80, 85, 86 wins. They haven't been below 86 wins since 2016, guys. Well, 2020, but 2020 doesn't count for anything. It doesn't exist. So, yeah. Since it has been literally they won 86 games in 2017. Like, they have not been below 86 since then. So, yeah.
All right, Sean McElmeal asking, what do you think about free agent JD Martinez? Not the typical Brewers type because he offers no defensive value, but would still be a nice right-handed power bat in the lineup. So, you know, if we're looking for power, Ryan, maybe him.
Yeah, but like he says, it's a DH only. There's no sending him out with a glove to left field anymore. That's not the project here. That's not what we're doing. He would be a pure DH, and that's just tough given what else they already have. Like, I think Christian Yelich is going to need to DH a bunch, if for no other reason than we have so many outfielders. Let's get him pushed over in that direction some. Yelich may be playing first base some too. Who knows how that's going to go, but it would be a tough roster fit for JD Martinez because basically he would be an everyday DH. And it's something that, like, that seems just anathema to like the Stearns Arnold program, like how they're going to run things. That seems like a tough one. And also the possibility of collapse for JD Martinez. I know he did have a good year last year, but he was coming off of like not a great year the year before. And people were kind of thinking,
is he done?
Yeah, people were wondering because, he bounced from a 867 OPS in 2021 down to a 790 in 2022. And people were like, okay, he's 34. Is this it? Is it, is it finally caught up to him? And then he bounced right back to an 893 and a 134 OPS plus. This was really good last year, and he would definitely help. But yeah, just the roster fit of it just seems so un-Brewers. And I also just kind of feel like, isn't he just going to go back to Boston? Like, isn't that what's going to happen here? He's just going to go back there and sign. And like, I don't know that he wants to go to Milwaukee. That's always the thing you have to remember with this stuff is like, does this guy want to come and do the Milwaukee thing? Or do they want to be on national TV all the time and like be in a, like, look at this. He's bounced from Boston to the Dodgers, like in the last, decade here or half decade. So yeah, I don't know that he would be interested in it anyway, even if we could get him. So it seems extremely unlikely, but stranger things have happened.
All right. Last question this week comes from My Only Lemonade asking, the Mets recently released the details of David Stearns' contract. It's 5 years and $50 million, which was only slightly higher than what Craig Counsell received from the Cubs. Is it possible that the Brewers were reluctant to pay Counsell more than Matt Arnold? I feel like that would have created an awkward power dynamic. Interesting thing I haven't really considered, but maybe possible. There is always those concerns of, when the coach makes more than the GM, not even just in baseball, that okay, who's really seen as the more valuable piece here, and who wins those arguments. So I guess, Spencer, any thoughts on that dynamic?
Yeah, like you said, I hadn't thought of that before, but it wouldn't shock me if that did factor into it a little bit. I don't know Matt Arnold's contract or what he's making currently, but I would be a little surprised if it was $8 million a year or higher.
It's not.
So I could see that being a little bit of a tough spot to be in for Mark, in terms of almost feeling like if I do pay Counsell, I also might need to raise Arnold's contract here. And now it is starting to get a little bit even more expensive to keep the manager. That is an interesting thought. I could see it creating a weird dynamic if they did give Counsell more money than Arnold didn't increase Arnold's pay, because Arnold would obviously know. Like, it would be a little bit of a weird spot to be in.
Yeah, I did speculate about this over the summer, James. I did mention it, but we didn't really, even at that point, we didn't know that Counsell was actually for sure leaving. It was all really speculation, and I wondered if something like this could be a problem. Like, it wasn't even a question of did I think it was. It was like, what would that mean if you do have like a manager making like 3 times what the general manager makes? What does that do to the power dynamic in that situation? Does it create some sort of imbalance? Is it something you don't want? I'm a pretty firm believer that you don't give the manager more power than the GM. The GM is the boss. They're the ones who's doing things. The manager sort of needs to follow their lead. I think that that's important, and that's the way it should be. And I do wonder if that got a little bit tricky this last year with Arnold, ascending to the top position, and from a position of, previously him and Council would have been more on kind of the same level. I've speculated about that. I've wondered, but we don't know. So there's kind of more questions than answers in this, but I think there's something here. There's something about this that, like, you don't necessarily want the manager to get more power and more, more power and more say in an organization than the GM. Like, that is a potential problem. And so that could have played into this whole thing, though. If they were willing to offer him $5.5 million, which, Paul thinks that was a CC Sabathia, they weren't actually offering that deal. Though I think they would have been happy if he had accepted it. They would have been fine with it. But it's like, I don't know. This is a really tricky one, and something that, I don't know how these things work within the framework of the power of a front office. Does the salary really matter, or is it other factors? I just don't have a good answer here.
Yeah. All right. That'll do it for Patreon questions. Time to give out some shout outs to new patrons. Ryan, who do we have this week joining us?
Yeah, I think we already did Zach Van Wy. Maybe we did, but because that was like 2 weeks ago now. And then last week we missed Dennis Williams in the midst of all of our craziness. So yeah, thank you guys. We appreciate it, and welcome aboard.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Reminder, you can go and become a patron as little as $2 a month. Patreon.com/MKE Tailgate. Before we go, I'm going to steal a line from Paul. Spencer, do you have anything to plug? He asks, knowing you do.
Yeah. So a buddy of mine from college, Gunnar Amelunk, and I decided to start a podcast of our own. It's called the Cream City Club Podcast. It is available on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube currently, but really we just discuss the Brewers and the Bucks. We're both huge fans of both. We have kind of thought about doing this since we were in college, and the council move is really what spurred us to eventually decide to start it. But something new, we're definitely working on it, trying to get better. But it'd be great if you could give us a try, give us a look and see how we're doing, and be great if you guys want to join us and listen.
Absolutely. Super excited for you. Sounds like a lot of fun, and everybody go check that out, and give them a 5-star review as well while you're giving us a 5-star review. That'd be great. All right. Thanks for stepping in, Spencer. Thanks for everybody sticking through this extra long episode, but a lot of news
last them through the break. So
I was gonna say, yeah, that's gonna do it. And as Ryan mentioned, we're gonna take a week off for Thanksgiving. So hopefully this gets you through those couple of weeks. We'll see you guys here in December. So have a good Thanksgiving, everyone. We'll see you then here on Milwaukee's Tailgate.
Fair weather fan, it's not what I am, even though the zip code has changed. I might smile and enjoy where I'm currently employed. Your soul can't be rearranged. It's hard to understand. It's so hard to understand. Fair weather, fair weather, fair weather fan.
3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is episode 310 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE.
Hold on.
Network. Yep.
Did you say Milwaukee's?
Yeah.
No, I don't think you did. Hold on.
No. I'm still waking up.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Okay.
Okay, hold on. Let's restart it. Okay, yeah, go ahead whenever.
All right. 3, 2, 1.